Hello, welcome to Honest Wargamer. As you can see, this isn't Rob. Rob is doing something else, probably playing a game of Warhammer, I imagine. I'm your host for today, Scrivo. Thank you to everyone on Patreon and obviously all you guys in Twitch that are subscribing. And obviously, podcast guys, stay hydrated. Don't forget we do have the handy Honest Wargamer bottles on pre-order. Not that I'm trying to be a corporate shill or anything, but it's my project, so why not? And as you can see, we have a guest today. So this is the wonderful Kieron Gillen. He is the writer of the just released today 40k Marneus Calgar book that Marvel have released. So I thought it'd be kind of nice to touch base with Kieron and kind of find out what was the deal with that. And obviously, it's hobby related and it's comic related, so it's kind of my thing really. So how you doing, Kieron? How's it going?
I'm good. I'm looking at the stream. I'm very excited by my font. As in, I really like your. This is the first thing I do anytime I watch a TV show. It's like,
yes.
Oh, I like that font. Alternatively, don't like
It's a
that
horrible font.
And this is definitely a font I like. So thanks for
I
having me.
hate the font personally. It doesn't have any extra characters. So if I'm trying to do the stuff like the podcast titles and stuff, and someone's put a question mark in the title, it doesn't work, and I'm sat there just going, "This is upsetting me." But that's just me being the design guy. It just annoys me. So how you doing? How's lockdown been treating you and kind of the change of the norm, as they say?
It's okay. I say this to everybody. I played lockdown on relatively easy mode in that I work from home anyway. I live with a wife and we don't hate each other.
That's strange.
We've got no we have no dependents. None of my work was cancelled. So on some basal level, like it's not like life is normal, but there's less disruption than many people. Obviously, in the wider sort of state, oh no, it's all apocalyptic and terrible. But
yes,
it's, yeah. The worst thing, of course, I've not played Warhammer in all of lockdown. All I've done is paint. So it's pretty sad.
Do you find that your kind of the hobby side of things is slower if you're not knowing you're looking forward to a game, or is that kind of an adjacent thing for you?
Adjacent. I've always come in waves. So it's like when I got back into the hobby, like circa 2008, I painted Skaven for like at least 3 years before I decided. I looked at like the hundreds of Skaven I painted and went, should probably play a game at these at some point. I'm always like, I sort of follow my interest in where I am at the moment.
That's cool. That's a good way to be with it. So, leading into that, then, how did you get into the hobby? Was it the traditional, as a kid, dip back out, dip back in type of thing?
Yeah, basically. I mean, I'm of course incredibly old, so like I got into Warhammer when you had to basically write in and get them to send you like A3 big sheets of paper with the month's models attached.
From the trolls.
So
they
really,
were actual trolls,
really
weren't they?
very old. Yeah. So that was kind of my way in. And if I remember, I ordered like Ravening Hordes for second. The army list for second edition was my first thing I bought from them. So I had no idea the actual rest of the rules. So I was trying to work out what the rest of the rules were just from the army list. But then I was there when 40k came out, and I've sort of like dropped in and out depending upon where I've been at any point. So like, I had I probably dropped when I went to university. I dropped out. Like I got back into it circa 2003. Like when me and Jim Rosignol, who I write a book called Ludocrats with, we both kind of got back into it hard. And I painted a Necron army. Then I got back into 2008. And sort of basically continued in some form ever since.
Yeah, once it gets its tendrils into you, it never seems to leave you again. It's like, I did that whole thing of going to the pub and thinking, yeah, I've grown out of that stuff now. I'm going to be a social person. I'm going to go and do some comic stuff. It'll be fine. And then it's always there in the corner. You look at those boxes and go, I'm not going to sell them, not just yet. And then it gets you again.
It's waiting for
yes.
you. I spent a lot of my 20s like in a similar way to you, but I got hit 30 and I end up just going, I don't care anymore. It's like,
that's how I spent my 30th birthday.
I don't care about like, I'm going to return. I'm very happy. Tell you what, it's the only thing that stops me accessing the internet is painting. Like, so like it's absolutely meditative for me. So it's something I find. As opposed to assembling miniatures, which I'm terrible at and always makes me angry. But painting is soothing.
And it's nice to have something that's not digital, right? So you're kind of then a bit more detached, and especially I can imagine for you, you're sat there writing all day at a desk. To be able to go and sit at a different desk or the same desk but just doing something different that isn't a screen is probably a nice change, right?
Yeah. It's like kind of like just anything. It's just the separation of it, I guess. And I've definitely got the problem where everything eventually becomes work. I mean, there's an irony here that I found a way to make Warhammer work now.
You're talking to me right now. I work in a toy shop selling the stuff, and then in my evenings I go, I'm not going to paint my own stuff. I'm going to talk about people painting their stuff instead. It just gets you. So when I was looking through your kind of your bibliography, kind of seeing what your kind of the greatest hits. Obviously, you're quite well known for some of the big things like you worked on Thor, Uncanny X-Men, indie titles like Phonogram and The Wicked and the Divine. But I looked at it, and one of your first kind of paid gigs specifically as a comic writer was for Black Library's Warhammer Monthly. I think it was issue 74, if my memory's right. Does that feel like it's kind of now you've looped around and you're back to where you started, but kind of with a different take on it?
There's a little bit. I mean, there's kind of like, how to phrase this. I mean, that was literally my first work for hire gig. Like, I forget if I'd done like an editorial cartoon before or after, but like I wasn't aware of Warhammer Monthly existing, because that was the end of my not into Warhammer period again. As in, they do comics, do they? And it's like, I want to write comics, and I know about Warhammer, and these two things can come together.
Fantastic.
So I did a couple of comics for them, and then the Warhammer Monthly closed down. So that was kind of like, obviously they knew they could never ever beat those two strips, so they had to back out of it. But it's sort of like, that taught me a lot, in just as writing for the deadline, writing in the format, and coming back to it X amount of times in a very different place. I think the interesting thing is the fact, in 2008, when I went to work after Phonogram, which was my indie book, I did a mini-series for Boom called Crown of Destruction. And that was my first American comic, my first American work for hire comic. So at both of those stages, basically, as I was entering a new stage in my career, I sort of used Warhammer as this sort of test bed for it. Like, literally, the Crown of Destruction I describe as, can I write an action comic? And it's me literally being paid a page rate to go, okay, how does punching work?
So that was the old world, wasn't it, as well, specifically?
Yeah, that was old. It was basically Empire versus Skaven with some undead stuff in the mix. And as you say, now I'm in this position where I have done a lot of comics, and I know the medium back to front, and I can bring a different set of skills to bear, as in, because I know what I'm doing, in a way which I was learning to before. So it's kind of like, I can go, okay, how should a 40k comic work? What can we do which is not even seen regularly in comics that really sells what's interesting about 40k? So it's stuff like putting aside the basic fact my storytelling's better, and putting aside the fact that I know how to deal with licensees and editors better, so I can get more of an idea of how to get ideas onto the paper.
Right.
There's also stuff like, there's a load of data pages in we use data pages in Marneus Calgar. So it's okay, let's make it feel a little bit like the manuals. Let's do some of the world building. It's like a single panel, and we can sort of explain some hard concepts, give some context, then go back into the story. So really trying to make it feel like, I mean, there's been so many really great Warhammer comics in the past, but the idea of we can bring a slightly different skill set to bear with the backup of something as big as Marvel. So that's kind of what those two things are doing.
So kind of touching on that, you were one of the writers in the initial wave of the newish, this was sort of 5 years ago, Marvel got the license for doing Star Wars comics. You launched their Darth Vader comic. So is that kind of set you up with kind of the good tools for how to approach a launch, but also an intellectual property being kind of treated with not necessarily kid gloves, but the respect and knowing how to kind of balance what you want to achieve without constantly having that sort of pushback, perhaps?
It's one of those really, I mean, in some ways you get it a little bit with Marvel. Like, even like, I've written like the Marvel Universe, I've written the big heroes like Iron Man and, Uncanny Avengers, that's not the book, Uncanny X-Men, and all manner of stuff.
There we go.
So I've, thank you very much. What we've got is, with the Marvel Universe, it is the leading bit of the IP, is the best way of putting it. And I hate using the word IP, but the idea that the comics are, in fact, despite the movies being bigger, the comics are also doing their own thing and pressing forward. Conversely, with Star Wars, the thing was a secondary piece of work.
Yes.
As in clearly it's all one canon, but the movies are the thing which is the driving force, and you are kind of like moving out. And the way I described doing the Star Wars stuff was like writing historical fiction. So like like my Darth Vader run started at the end of A New Hope, ends somewhere near the beginning of Empire. So I'm basically looking at that period and thinking, okay, what logically can happen here?
So you're filling in the gaps and also very much.
Yeah. It's like also not filling in the gaps, but what is emotionally interesting here? So it's kind of like if nothing was interesting happening, I would have turned down the gig. But in the case of Star Wars, it's like, Vader discovers that he has a kid. That's one thing.
And having that kind of filling in the details of these kind of key points that never have been explored, I suppose, and it's kind of pulling on those threads.
Yeah. Me as a fan, me as a fan and a creator, just think, okay, what do I want to know? You know what I mean? As opposed to what's extraneous and what do I want to know. And also in the case of like Star Wars, it's like both me and Jason, who was the other writer on the first wave of books, the key thing for us is to make it feel like Star Wars. Because since the movie was the quote unquote real core experience, we didn't do stuff like narrative captions. We didn't do stuff, various like Kirby-esque subjective storytelling techniques. We just didn't use because they weren't part of the visual language of Star Wars.
Stylistically needed to match the films and feel at home in that kind of universe per se. In its stylistic choices.
Exactly. And continuing on to Warhammer is what the choices I've ended up making are very, very different because the lead part of Warhammer is, of course, the miniatures. It's the miniature game and that, of course, doesn't exist in even the novels are in some ways a secondary form. As in they're basically epiphenomenons, to use a fancy word, of this pure idea of what Warhammer is. So so the question is, so with the Star Wars, it was let us try to make the comics feel like the movies. This is like, how can you make the comics express the underlying virtues of why we play Warhammer and why we love the world and why we're into it. So it's so much like a much more you've got to make a leap of faith there, a creative leap, as in, okay, how can we make it feel like that? What sort of techniques do we use? And in that case, it's like, I look at my wider skill set. So I'm thinking about Garth Ennis war comics. I'm thinking about Jonathan Hickman storytelling pages. You know what I mean? So how can you kind of hit those kind of... And also, I forgot his name, Martial Law. The guy who wrote Martial Law. Pat Mills. Mills type of satire.
I was Googling very slowly.
So those pre-existing trends in comics, they're all very Warhammer. In fact, I would imagine Pat Mills was probably an influence on Warhammer.
Yes. Time Rines,
And how you get them all to... So how can a Warhammer comic be? So it's kind of that. In some ways, so much of my job is being proper. I lie. So much of my job when I am actually doing a work for hire job is problem solving. As in, okay, what actually is the job here? What can I do? What do the people who have the franchise want? What are they interested in? What do I want to do? Because if I don't want to do it, I won't do it. And also, what the hell would the audience want to see as well? So all these things sort of tie together, and you're trying to find something that actually feels like that.
So that kind of leads into one of my other questions, which was obviously you've got the artist Jason Burrows is working on Marneus Calgar with you. He's very much got, when I looked at his back catalogue, it's a lot of the stuff with Avatar Press that's kind of Cthulhu, very kind of demonic at times sort of style of thing. So it felt very a natural kind of person to maybe get in for the project. Was that obviously a consideration when kind of looking at how you were approaching it? Because he looks to me as an artist, you look and go, that guy could draw every Chaos God and its followers and it just would fit.
It's like, he's not somebody who would shy away from gore, is a good word for it. In fact, it's one of the ironies that the extra... I mean, people are watching, they don't know the Avatar books. Avatar is very much primarily an extreme horror line. So in other words, some of the stuff Jason has had to draw is genuinely monstrous in terms of it's meant to horrify.
Crossed is not for me, let's put it that way.
There is some quote strong stuff in there I'll put in. So he's also worked with some of the best storytellers in the business. He's worked with like Garth Ennis, Alan Moore, and so he's used to writing really detailed scripts and really into world detail. So yeah, he's one of those people like that Jeff Darrow-esque sense of scale and apocalypse. And the thing about Warhammer is, if you have a different art or something, you can do a different side of Warhammer.
Yes.
If you had someone who's a bit more impressionistic, you go more into the kind of the Inquisition and horror sort of aspects. And in his case is the fact you've got this kind of almost schematic like clean line. It's almost like Tintin decided to start murdering people.
Yes, very European in its kind of the approach almost in that traditional sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you get the him is like it's all about very clean storytelling. It's all about showing the moment to moment violence, and that's kind of what was really. And also, Jason's a friend of mine. He's somebody I've wanted to work with for years. So kind of like, oh yeah, we can finally get together and do our hyper violent, high dark
Yeah.
fantasy space for a comic together. I mean, that actually reminded me of the other thing. Like my other sort of job is obviously this is the first Warhammer comic, and at least part of the idea for me is as opposed to coming in and joining a line and doing a book in it, it's like, okay, I'm going to set the basic tone for the line. And when I say tone, I don't necessarily mean like the emotional tone, because there'll be darker books and like, there's all different sorts of tones and the writers all will have to make their own thing. But like how you can do a Warhammer book in the Marvel mode. So stuff like the data pages, stuff like the storytelling devices, it's like, okay, here's how I think a Warhammer comic can work. So this is what me and Jason have cooked up. People can kind of build and make it feel like a coherent body of work, because that's kind of like really part of the appeal. As in the fact we're doing these minis, we're doing a mini and it's a standalone story. We always want to have the connections between them as well, in the same way a classic Marvel story works, I guess.
So having those kind of those planet image kind of pages to give context is kind of nice, because obviously a lot of the time in Games Workshop kind of materials, a planet will just be a blob on a map and you go, cool, that's that name of that planet, that's it. So giving that context kind of adds some depth, I suppose, doesn't it?
Thank you. Yeah, it's what as people haven't read the comic yet, that's one of my favourite devices. So we do these 3/4 pages. Here's a picture of the planet. Here's a brief bio of the planet. Occasionally we get a quote for the day sort of thing.
Those horrendous.
I might have said yes to this job just to write quote for the for the days, because it's like that makes my heart. But and it's one of the joy that is, as you say, you get a bit of context, but also you get a context of the Warhammer universe. It's like that one would be described the Agri world. It's like that's it's a really horrible description of that world, and you kind of realize, oh yeah, this universe is kind of bad. It's a bad place. I would not like to live there. And that nasty kind of way of the fact that like in comics you have limited amount of space of storytelling, you can't linger on some of the details as you might be able to do in prose much. So like trying to make sure that it all kind of gathers together like that on all those devices.
Yeah. So one big question I had for you. So obviously I'm quite aware of your work. In quite a few of your comics, you've ended up having very much playlists that you then kind of synchronize with your work. That tends to be in a lot of more of your things like your Phonogram, Wicked and the Divine. It kind of lends itself naturally to that. Did you have a playlist for Calgar of kind of like stuff you listen to?
I've had less of a playlist than I usually do, but I've quite often put an album on repeat. Like early on when I was writing Warhammer, the Batushka album, Yentaya. I'm reading off the actual device because I can't pronounce that, which is it's like Eastern Orthodox chants over like thrash metal, and that was kind of like this big droney, messy rock noise.
That sounds grimdark.
And then it was really, honestly, it's so grimdark. You won't believe it. I might say it's amazing. It's amazing in every single definition of the word. And there was like other bits I was listening to. What are they called? I can't say that. I can't say that they're Blank Mask, who are like I can't say the band's name because it's got swearing in. Can I swear?
Yeah, go for it. We say a lot of swear words on the show, so it's all good.
Oh, great. The spin-off project of Fuck Buttons.
Yes.
Okay. Their noisier side project, Blanked Mass, I believe it's called. I was listening to their stuff, and it's really incredibly loud, aggressive, like monstrous techno. But also at the same time, when I was writing the final issue of the mini, which is basically the big on action rock and roll explosion, I actually just listened to Appetite for Destruction on repeat, because like I got into Guns N' Roses and like metal as a teenager at the same time as I got into Warhammer.
Yeah.
So I kind of like tapped my inner 13-year-old like Midlands rock kid and hit it like that. So that was a lot of fun. So short answer is a lot of metal.
Well, that feels like a logical step, and I was half expecting that, but then at the same time I was half expecting you to go, I was listening to a lot of like Robin or something, because just sidestep the kind of the expectation perhaps, but yeah.
I listen to it when I'm writing Eternals. I listen to a lot of ABBA for some reason. I don't know why. It's like it's this big, epic, Esad Ribic, enormous space opera, and for some reason it's just come down to ABBA in my head. But that's what I do.
Yeah, well, it's very Kirby costumes, kind of fits in with that kind of time period, I suppose. to some extent.
That's my thinking, actually. Yeah.
At least that's an excuse and you can stick to it. So the next question I had was Calgar is quite an established character. I think I counted roughly, I think there's 5 figures they've done. So he's been in the kind of the catalogues throughout the whole of the history of 40k. Why was he your target character rather than kind of a new character or any other named character? Why Calgar?
It's interesting. I mean, like, before we kind of like started like specifically being Marneus Calgar, there was like conversations, okay, because obviously Marvel being Americans have less contact with Warhammer than I do. So I'm aware that I've often acted as a translator between Marvel and Games Workshop, as in I speak both languages. But it's like there's been lots of conversations and that kind of the sort of comics that Games Workshop would like to see. That kind of like these are characters we think might be interesting, and like these. It's not like a short list of do Marneus Calgar, but he was on a big list of people who they think this character might be useful. And especially when I got thinking about the sort of topics to cover, because the one of the real sort of key core Warhammer stories is, okay, Space Marines. How do Space Marines get made? Like, we see the Space Marines, okay, how did that guy get to be that guy?
Yeah.
And so, like, that's kind of like in terms of what the story, quote unquote, does, is an origin story for Space Marine generally, but it's also a story of a Space Marine specifically, as in Marneus himself. So you get to know, like, okay, this is how Space Marines are made, if you're following the book. But you also get how Marneus, who's a very special kind of Space Marine, but he's also like a paragon of being a Space Marine. He's that kind of the weirdness of he's so by the book that he's become unusual again.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So. And also, the other important thing about Marneus, despite being such an important figure, despite being so many miniatures of him, and there was a drawing. He was in Rogue Trader, wasn't he?
I think so, because he sat down on the little chair with his fists. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the kind of you know what I mean? Like he's been there all the time, but at the same time, we don't know a huge amount about him. You know what I mean? It's not like there's a significant blank slate there. So he's a prominent figure who definitely is useful when talking about whatever Space Marines means, who we could know more about. You know what I mean? And that's a kind of like golden sort of area. I mean, like looking to the future, like depending on the minis down the road and what people choose to do, I imagine it'll be a mix of new characters and old characters, and like they won't all be about the Ultramarines. You know what I mean?
It did seem logical to me though, because Ultramarines are essentially the poster boys. When you look at most Space Marine kits, if it's not got a Space Marine that's an Ultramarine on the front on the box, there's something different. It's probably not an Ultramarine Space Marine then, as a whole.
I mean, one of the line I've been using in interviews is, the Ultramarines wrote the book, literally, the Codex Astartes. They wrote it. So if you're trying to introduce, because as well as the book appealing to Warhammer fans, I'm also trying to appeal to people who don't know anything about Warhammer.
Yeah.
So if you're going to explain Warhammer 40k and the Space Marines, you've probably got to start with this is what a normal Space Marine is like.
Yes.
Because then when the Space Wolves or the Blood Angels turn up, you know why they're cooler.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As in, what makes them cool is because they're different.
You don't assume that everyone's going to be a chapter where they've got some weird quirk inherently.
Yeah. You need that. You need that kind of this is what normal is in this utterly bizarre universe.
Bunny is normal.
Then, quotation marks. So then you can orientate yourself. So that's at least part of the reason why you start with the Ultramarines, I think.
Yeah. So if you could then, you kind of touched on other characters being explored. Is there some characters specifically in mind? If you could if an editor approached you and said, right, we want you to do a mini-series now, who would you bite their hand off to write about?
Honestly, that's a really good question. I would probably, if I was generally given complete free reign, I'd probably make someone up, I think. You know what I mean? Because when I'm actually, this is kind of, I said earlier about my different parts of my brain. Like, the full-on when I'm actually playing Warhammer at home, all my stuff is almost all home brew. I always make my own chapters.
You've
and,
got to. That's half
so
the
I'm
fun,
that kind
right?
of guy. And if you gave me a book, I'd probably do a Rogue Trader book so you could have all the weirdos aboard, and you know what I mean. I could get to pick up my favorite Imperial stuff and be able to move around and do cool stuff like that. And also, imagine Star Trek if everyone was awful.
Yeah, or Firefly but grimdark. It would be so much fun, right?
Exactly, you know what I mean. But I must admit, I've just been reading the new Necron Codex, and there's a lot to love in the Necron Codex in terms of the big figures of the characters. Yeah, I'm very much feeling the Necrons at the moment.
Because you've got a Necron army pre-paint. That was one of your early kind of jump backs into the hobby, wasn't it? You said.
I did. In fact, was it last year or the year before? I actually stripped my paint job of my Necron from 2003 and redid them all.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I've got a bunch of Necron I've still got to paint, which is one of my next projects.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a nice, fun project to do as well. Because with all the nice new bits, you've got kind of stuff to encourage and tempt you on, I suppose.
Yeah, they're painted them in Soundtech, and I'm actually considering moving over to the Silent King sort of color scheme
Yes.
because I reckon if I use the contrast dunes over it and then did a dry brush of brass, it would look like well, I forgot the name of the Silent. I can't pronounce the Silent King's
Zerak
dynasty.
or something. It's like almost like Szechuan. It's written, and I find it really offensive that in my head I just go straight to Szechuan. I don't know why. I'm just obviously always hungry.
Yes, an absolutely delicious dynasty.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm sort of thinking about redoing a bunch
Yeah.
of them. But yeah.
Because that kind of leans into your. I would say from seeing a lot of your miniatures, obviously on Twitter, you post quite a bit. You tend to lean into the whole grim, dark, Blanchesque kind of grubby look of everything looking horrendously grubby, but in like a good creative way. And
Well, that's more like how to phrase this is like that might speak to my incompetence, but
it's a fine line, isn't
specifically,
there?
there is like basically I look at my miniatures in front of me and I just sort of see what I'm trying. I normally like when painting an army, I'm trying to do something. Like I've actually got a Space Marine chapter painted up, and when I was then that was about 3 or 4 years ago maybe, and I'd finally okay, I'm going to paint some Tamaris, and I'm going to finally actually learn to edge highlight properly because I've always hated edge highlighting.
I still
So
do.
the whole project was, can I try to get a more clean look? And to be honest, they're probably the cleanest guys I've done, but it's still pretty dirty. And whilst the Night Haunts are the last thing I painted, the Night Haunts, the whole aim was 100% how blanchy can I make it? Can I make it my natural messiness and my griminess? Let's just cover it in goo.
Yeah.
So like, there's definitely that, and like. I'm actually heading back. I'm just at the moment painting more Marines, and then I'm going to go to Necron. But I think as I sort of said, I'm going to try to mess up my Necron because I love the idea. Because at the moment they're pretty clean, and I really like the idea of them emerging broken from the ground, covered in grime and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm going to lean into.
Yeah. Well, to me, that's what screams to me. It's like when I do my Space Marines, even them, they look so tired and kind of worn out, and that's to me half the thing. The whole universe is set around that, really, isn't it? So it makes some sense, and it's fun to get messy.
If there's only war, there's no time for
exactly.
War. That's the.
If an army's cleaning up all their armor each time, you just have to think, are they really that busy? Probably not. So my kind of, I think it's my second to last question is, so do you have any hopes or goals for the kind of the partnership between Marvel and Games Workshop? Because obviously you've kind of sat in on that. What's your kind of hopes with that? Are you wanting to see this as being kind of like the start of a long-lasting dynasty of these sorts of books, expanding further from that?
I hope. Yeah, I won't be satisfied until there's 40,000 miniseries. Like in a real world, yeah, it's like I would love this to work because it's like, as I was saying earlier, I'm trying to set. This is a useful way to do a 40k comic at Marvel, and I've given advice to I've written like big plan documents in terms of these are maybe books you might want to think about down the line. So that element. And there's talking about creators to bring on and characters to, that whole kind of thing. And ways to make... This is how I've always tried to do my work for hire comics is. I want to make each comic absolutely standalone as possible in terms of you pick up a Marneus Calgar off the shelf, read them all and go, okay, that was a great story. But then if you read another one, let's say they did another mini, there's enough sort of soft connections between the two. You go, oh, right, these are happening in the same universe and, reward me, even though you don't have to. That's the kind of stuff I look for, as in the ways to make it feel bigger than the page. And that's what comics are really good at. And to be honest, that's one way that comics is kind of like how the 40k universe works. The 40k universe is really interesting to how modular it is. As in, there's areas of 40k I don't know much about. You know what I mean?
And you want to know more about, right?
I don't know enough about the Tau, ever. Or the Jakari, or the I can't pronounce Jakari. Like those areas, I know the surface level, but I also know that one day I'll be able to pick up that book and go for it properly, as opposed to the areas I know quite a bit about. You know what I mean? And that's in the same way I hope the comics would work, as in no matter how long they go, there's a kind of like a modular nature to them, but also a connectivity to them, and that's part of the magic to me. Because 40k is enormous.
Yes, it's so
you know what I mean?
big.
Like the universe is so big. There's a bit in the first. This is one of the bits we had to get in the first issue. There's a map of the universe at the present,
Yes.
and those specifically, it's like we must show the whole universe, then do a tiny square over what the Ultramarines control. To show that okay, all the battles we're doing and all this, this is this small in
It's
this
a vast
big place.
empire, but it's the tiny little corner at the bottom of the map.
Exactly.
Which I think helps to give context as well, because sometimes having that map, you look at it and go, this means nothing, without there being the context of, well, this battle took place here, and this planet, until you start looking at those, it doesn't mean anything, and I think that's the strength that can be played to with these books.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, comics are a visual medium, so like, as opposed to novels. Actually, I'm reading the Romance of the Three Kingdoms at the moment. Sorry, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, like the Chinese classic. And I'm spending a lot of my time looking at the map at the front because I need to, why is it important they take this city? Well, okay, it's there. You know what I mean? And that's comics can really very easily do this explains the context clearly. I mean, like you sort of see that when I'm describing the agri world in the comic, Nova Filium, I'm talking about why do they have agri? So I'm talking about the nearby Hive City. So in other words, we're talking about why this stuff is important in a very kind of low level way in terms of what are the stakes here, I guess. So yeah, I agree. I think there's some really hopefully useful stuff people can do.
Yeah, well, it's very exciting. So the big question I had as well is like, for most hobbyists, we tend to just go, right, something's on pre-order, 2 weeks time, it turns up. How can they get this book?
Well, there's multiple. I mean, it's basically released in single issues to begin with, and they come out monthly. The first one's out today. It should be available in your local comic shop. They normally have copies to the shelf. It's possible they might have sold out. If it sells out, they should be able to order you some more. There's a possibility like they'll sell out and have to do a second printing. But that's basically, there's a site called if you Google comic book finder or something like that, you can actually get a site will tell you where your nearest comic book shop is. It's also available to buy online, so you can buy a digital copy. Comixology is probably the best place to get it.
I did that this morning myself. I thought I'd read ahead.
A fine place, and so you just go and buy it there. And and when the mini's over, there will almost certainly be a collection of the whole thing together, so you can buy it all in one book. Which is, just when I'm writing, I always want to make individual issues really cool, but also the book hold together as a story. Because you go back to Dickens, like all of Dickens' stuff was originally published in chapters. So the idea of being able to make literature out of pieces is something which I really try to do. So they're the three main options. Oh, and when it's in a trade, it'll be available to buy from all your usual bookshops and online sellers, as well as comic shops.
Cool. I think I've actually run out of questions, which is a good sign that I've actually managed to not just mess them up. So have you got any shout-outs you want to do, Kieron, or anything like that? Or
So my brain goes, have I any shout-outs?
Open-ended questions are dangerous.
If people want to hear more of my nonsense, what I'm going to do is, as soon as I finish this, I'm going to write my newsletter. I do a basically weekly or semi-weekly newsletter. It's a Substack. Kieron Gillen. My name is written here. KieronGillen.substack.com. You can sign up to that, and I will send you weekly mails of my nonsense. I'm on Twitter at Kieron Gillen. Generally, enter Kieron Gillen into any search engine, you'll find me. Relevantly to Warhammer fans, I've got a comic called Diorite, and Die is about games and fantasy, and it's like an adult comic about people losing themselves in fantasy and about middle-age horrors. And it sort of does touch tangentially to the hobby, I guess. Just, I haven't done the Warhammer. Eventually, I want to do a sort of Warhammer-inspired episode because I was researching 1970s early, what's it called? What's it called? The Owlin Weasel? Sorry, Owlin Weasel. That was the original
one
fanzine,
just before White Dwarf, yeah.
Yeah. So I was sort of researching the 1970s scene, and there's something really with Neil and I about where Games Workshop came from. It's like this really small
the
London
little shop.
people
It's terrifying when you look at it. It's very quaint and very 70s.
Exactly. It's and it's a long period. It's like 45 years, basically, in terms of this is a lifetime.
Yes.
This is one of the things about for me is the history of this stuff interests me and how things change and grow, and it's really a lot of fun to be part of it. Look at that official smooth
There we
ending.
go. So obviously, thank you to everyone that's joined us and kind of tuned in. There's quite a few of them in the chat. I haven't actually looked at the numbers. So
Was there any questions?
there wasn't any actual questions really from the chat. I think there was one early on that kind of a guy said that he was he liked the way you went and used Cassio as a threat for Vader in your run. So
that was fun. That was actually that was Lucas' film suggestion.
Nice.
As in, I was talking about I wanted to have an officer who was like the military, sort of the technician side, and then they actually Cassio could have survived. So in other words, they gave me an existing person who could have survived the Death Star, who could be of use.
That's nice.
And I ran with that, and it was a lot of fun. I've only just realised Tag is, of course, he in the Star Wars comics, he's kind of the guy who said, "Why build a Death Star? We could buy 10,000 Star Destroyers for that." And I've kind of realised, like, Hexamar in the Marneus comic is a little bit like that. As in, he's the guy who basically he's a bit of a math hammer guy. Quintus
made me
Hexamar.
laugh already so much this morning.
It's funny. Hexamar's a delight. He's very much like the we can get a +1 to attack here. We should do that. But like,
yes.
I joke, not actually like that. But because you think about it, like Tag is absolutely the guy who's gone, why would you spend 500 points on this model when you can buy 500 Skaven slaves and send them to battle?
That's how I plan all my army lists. It's like, can I do it with Orc Boys instead? And do I want to hurt my back for the rest of that day? The answer is normally no. So thank you for joining us, Kieron. It's been great. It's been nice to catch up, actually, because I don't think I've seen you since Thought Bubble last year or the year before, in fact. So, because I've been a bit out of the comic scene, I've kind of stayed away.
Yeah, it's like, honestly, hopefully whenever this is all over, it'll be lovely to see people again. It has been a lot.
Yes, it's been nice. And I look forward to reading the next issues. Is it out every month? Is it monthly, I believe?
Every month.
So
it's out every month, so I guess it'll be around this time in November.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for obviously tuning in and joining in. You guys in the podcast, I'll put in the show notes below links to Kieron's Twitter, his newsletter and everything as well. So if you want to check him out and kind of look into his other comics, which are really good stuff, actually. It's like, I don't like to sort of go off on one about how good stuff tends to be, especially if they're there, but I do enjoy Kieron's books. So some of his runs, like the Thor run he did a good few years ago, is a really nice one that I think they've taken a lot of inspiration for the film stuff from at times, but that's just my take on it. So
thank you.
There we go.
John, that means a lot, man.
It's cool. I don't say nice things unless I mean it, and that's why you shouldn't watch some of the streams where I'm talking about the 40k app. I can't be positive if it's not positive, but there we go. It's in the name, so there we go. But thank you for tuning in, guys, and we'll see you for Stream Street tomorrow. I believe Rob's back with, I don't think there's anything planned, but there'll be something. So